Okay. Yep, there's Tori. So she made it back. Chandra said she wasn't coming. Her son got promoted to the varsity to play, and so she's going to the ball game. So good for her. All right. So where are we? Let's, as we always do, let's look at our weekly schedule. This is March 26th. This is the fourth and final of our case studies. You are to be doing week 5 activities, and you'll complete your activities next week with week 6, and then we'll have our last weekend in Charlotte together where we'll cover the materials folder. You folks, you'll get a break because we'll have already covered most of the things in that folder, the topics during the case studies. So that hopefully that weekend will go fairly fast and easy for us as we work through that materials folder. So let's look at our activities. This week you were to interview an assistant principal or school disciplinarian, what the biggest concerns, what guides their decision making, observe a student due process, report what surprised you the most. Usually what I get back from people about what they're surprised about is how long it takes and how involved it gets, and getting witness statements and making sure everybody that you followed the process. Hopefully you saw whatever system that they were using in place, a code of conduct, PBIS, and those kinds of things. One of the things that I want to make sure I hit on, and I'll spend much more time in class with this, so I won't just bore you with it once, I'll bore you twice. One of the things that really bothers me about watching discipline being processed too many times is a rush to judgment. And sometimes we miss some of the things along the way that come back to bite us. You have to slow down and take your time. So that's always the biggest one for me is do it right the first time. Make sure that you've done your due diligence on due process. So that's it for me. And the second thing that I'll talk more specifically about when we cover disciplinary data reporting in that manual is this is where unscrupulous administrators make hay, is underclassifying incidents, and where they get caught is when they're acts of crime and violence and they have to be reported to the police and they don't, or the police are involved and then they don't put that in when they report it to the state, but we'll go over that. The main thing that I was hoping that you'd be looking for is to make sure that wherever you work, that they are processing, that they are spending the appropriate amount of time. If it's a public school, that they're entering that data into PowerSchool and generating the suspension letters, that they're putting in what actually happened and not coding everything that happened on the bus as bus misbehavior. If a murder occurs on the bus, it's still a murder. That doesn't just make it bus misbehavior, things of that nature, that your group is being ethical in their reporting and the classifying of the incidents that occur. We had a situation when I was in CMS at one of the middle schools out in the university area. The parents finally went to the news media because they felt like that the school was not taking serious what was going on the bus, and the police got involved. We had to go through a change in administration there because their contention was if it happened on the bus, anything that happened on the bus could be classified as bus misbehavior and not as an act of crime and violence and reported to the police as it should have been. There was a language barrier problem there and with the parents and the students, and they were trying to take advantage of that to not report what was actually going on. It was pretty sad that we had professionals who were behaving that way. But again, that's all part of your process, making sure that you follow all the rules of due process, but also all the reporting rules that go along with that. And one of the things that I found years ago is they kind of go together. Sometimes administrators don't want to really do due process because they don't want to know what happened. They don't want to know to the extent of what went on, because if they did, then they'd be obligated to report that, and they don't want to do that. And so sometimes it's not that people don't know how to do due process. They don't want to. because there are consequences. Bad PR, a bad report, too many suspensions, too many acts of crime and violence. We'll cover that when we go over the reporting laws. And so it's in your best interest sometimes for those things not to be reported, but it's in your really what you want them not to happen rather than just under-reporting them. So we'll talk about that more when we're together next. But hopefully that things went well when you observed that. And then your last one that you'll do next week is field trip policy. Most of you have already done that, and I've gotten some good responses, and I've written back on each and every one of them. The only other thing I would say is hopefully your district has a policy on how to deal with parents and media that arrive on the scene, and if you don't, it can get sideways on you in a hurry. But the first thing to do is call the police. You don't want to be seen as doing a cover-up. There have been cases where everybody thought everybody was fine. They all went home, and then later on things popped up with kids. You need to call the police and get the medical authorities there and do all those things. Don't take it upon yourself to, oh, it was a minor incident. Nothing bad happened here. We don't need the negative publicity. No. Make sure you follow through with contacting all the appropriate people, and make sure you've got a class list. You make sure you account for all the kids, get the medical professionals, the police, fire, ambulance, get them there on the scene. I've seen buses spontaneously ignite, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour after the wreck, those kinds of things. Make sure you get kids to safety. So if you've not done that one, again, it's best to have a policy in place in terms of how to handle media and parents that arrive on the scene. That's that one. Okay. See, I've got some things there. All right. So that takes us to case study 4. Be sure to read Chapter 7, the principal's role in special ed services, and the quick reference guide. Be sure to review the PowerPoint inclusion versus mainstreaming. Now, for the purposes of this, inclusion is, mainstreaming is what we used to, when we put the kids in a pull-out situation, they call that mainstreaming in that PowerPoint. Inclusion is our modern inclusion model where the kids go to their regular classes and we have the EC staff go in and work with them in classes. Respond to the 6 questions at the end of the narrative, and then do your PowerPoint, and then do your reflection. All right. So this is a more modern version of parents complaining about EC. In my era, they complained about not getting exceptional children's services. We've done a much better job as a profession, providing services to students. We've done a much better job informing parents of their rights, and the parent handbook and all those things, and we'll cover that in our materials. All of those things, we've done a better job. But in the more modern era, now we're getting a backlash from regular ed parents. And we've talked about trying to educate everybody's child. That's our goal now. And so there was a time when the concern was we weren't doing the best we could for exceptional children. Now that has boomeranged back on us. Now we have regular ed parents who say, because you're teaching these children in my child's class, you're holding my child back. And so that's the complaints that we're getting more of now, because the EC parents, they know what their rights are and they're getting those. Now it's the regular ed people who say, wait a minute, it's infringing upon my rights. So it's an interesting case, and we'll see how y'all do. All right. So who's going to be first tonight to lead us off?
I'll go.
That's Cynthia?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm still just learning to recognize voices.
You're fine. Sorry. Yes, Cynthia. Hello.
Okay. I'm going to make you the host. I'm going to change the host to Cynthia. I am going to stop my share and stop my video. And you will now click on share and share your screen, and we'll get started.
Okay, so for some reason when I logged in today, all I have is this screen is our pictures. could someone, one of my group members, could you show the slides? Because I don't even have the button to click.
Okay, when you move your cursor up and down, you don't get a little dashboard that allows you to click on share?
No, I just have 4 pictures across the top. So
what? Okay. All right. So we'll change.
hopefully one of my group members can post it.
Okay.
I have it up.
Okay. Who's I?
Is that Tori?
Tori.
All right, Tori. Okay. I'm going to reclaim the host. I'm going to go to Tori Moore. I'm going to make Tori the host. All right. Then I'm going to.
I figured it out. That was.
Okay, Tori, if you'll share now.
There it is.
There we go.
Okay. My husband has me set up with 2 screens now. It's all confusing.
Oh,
All
that's great.
right, there we go.
Okay, so when we started talking about this, the first thing was that we noticed it obviously wasn't in America, but we decided to discuss it through the lens of
That's
what
correct.
if this were happening in a school that was in America. Tori, if you can go to the next slide.
Mm-hmm.
That was just put in that way just to throw you off as usual. To see if
Okay,
you could
well,
overcome
we
that.
gotcha. We figured it out.
Oh,
In the U.S., children's obviously with special needs are protected by IDEA, which is a federal law, not a state law, even though our Secretary of Education for the United States doesn't know that. But and students with, sorry guys, they must be served in what is called the least restrictive environment, the LRE. And so it's very important for students to have an environment where they can see and be a part of a normal classroom discussion as much as is possible. Obviously, some schools have, separate classrooms, especially if called life skills or severe and profound and things like that. But a lot of the students who have IEPs can be in a regular classroom. So the first thing the next thing that we really talked about was how to have an inclusive classroom. And we noted that one of the biggest things is to have 2 teachers. It didn't mention that there were 2 teachers in this situation, but in America, we would need to have an EC person in there, whether it was another teacher, an EC teacher, whether it was an ECTA, something. And I think we also talked about how the other teacher in there should not just serve the EC students, but that they should serve all students, and that way the kids aren't singled out. So you can't just take all the EC kids and put them over here and all the non-EC kids and put them in another group. You have to have a couple EC kids and a couple lower kids, or you have to have, the higher kids teaching the lower kids, something like that, so that they're not singled out and targeted. But at the same time, grouping is really helpful, and it's much easier, obviously, if you have 2 different teachers. Next. These are just some of the benefits of inclusion. You can use differentiated instruction, supportive teaching strategies. You have a reduced stigma, especially for the EC students, that's that least restrictive environment piece. The effective use of resource classes, so they can be pulled out for small things, like maybe to really focus on math problems, but then come back in and be on the same path as the other students. And you can serve more students in a classroom of students than you can in just a resource room. And even students who might not be listed as having an IEP, but maybe lower, or maybe be on a tiered system, will get the benefit of having that EC teacher in the classroom. And this holds all students to a high expectation. So we put in here that you have inclusion classes versus mainstreaming. In inclusive classrooms, there are special instructions, there's a specialist in the classroom, and the IEP. So you have those individual programs. And then in mainstream, you are providing, in the least restrictive environment, You're provided support to the to general ed teachers, and they're there to consult. Then we looked at the 6 questions. The first one was, how might the principal approach this in future meetings with his teachers? It is necessary to choose one approach or the other. So we talked about how, and this is probably where, I don't know, at least I was, my group can totally chime in here, but I was a little unsure. I mean, I don't think they have to choose one approach, but I do know that they need to follow the law, which says the least restrictive environment. So within those regulations, it can be done in slightly different ways, but you can't single kids out. You can't just contain them in a classroom if they can be mainstreamed, that sort of thing. So I say yes, but also no to that question.
I wasn't sure exactly, because at first I was looking at that, but then I was like, is the approach about future meetings, how to meet with the teachers? So I was confused about specifically what approach they were speaking.
Oh, okay. So with the future of the meetings, obviously you need to have like PLCs with the EC teachers, or PLCs with the teachers that have those classes that have inclusion in them, and at least be giving the same level of support to all of the students, even if they're in different classrooms, even if the way that you go about it in your classroom isn't exactly the same.
And also, the principal needs to meet with the teachers and have somewhat of an information session. And I was thinking that, I mean, she could probably invite an EC person from, let's say, downtown to talk to the teachers. And the reason why I say this is because a lot of times, even though it talks about parents complaining, I have heard teachers complaining about having some of the kids in some classes. So, I mean, he needs to sensitize the teachers. That's the first approach he needs to take, to kind of dispel this from out of their heads. Because a lot of times, sometimes a lot of the things that parents come up with, many teachers live in the neighborhood, and they say stuff, and some of the parents hear, and they'll come to school with some of the things that they hear. So
I'm dealing with that a little right now, because I'm a co-teacher, and I'm in a situation where at the last minute this teacher was gifted an inclusion class of students who have a variety of concerns, mostly behavior, and her attitude has really laid the foundation for this class, and it's been my job to try to overcome her disappointment. And so, yeah, it's very difficult when someone doesn't buy in or understand or what have you.
So she needs to probably start with her teachers, and then from there move on to, the rest of the community, parents and all.
Okay, so what is the path that Eugenia should take? She needs to evaluate teaching methods being used in the classrooms and provide resources in PD regarding working with students with disabilities in the classroom. Teachers need a knowledge of the types of disabilities presented in their classrooms and strategies for working with those students. And then again, we brought up the idea of, can specialists go into the Gen Ed room and co-teach? There seems to be a gap in the continuum concerning location of services being provided. So I want to hope that this wouldn't happen in an American classroom, but I know it does. But we definitely have idea which says that this should not be happening. Like, it is set in place that students should have access to the specialists, whether it's in pull-out resource classrooms or whether it's in inclusion classrooms. Is one point of view more correct than the other? Sergio cannot make a determination regarding the student's classroom. The IEP team determines the least restrictive environment for the student, which could be 100%. So I don't know. I don't think one is, but I definitely think that they could argue either side. As long as you're following idea, that's what matters the most. Team, anybody else? No. Okay. What kind of collaboration from the children's families might the principal and teachers propose? This is one where we really were talking about how we need to educate parents. So if these parents are having such a big problem, they don't get a say. Like if they want their kid somewhere else, then I guess they can take their kid somewhere else. But this is the way that education works. These are the way the classes are. And if they have a problem, then they have a problem with public education. But in order to help them understand, we have to educate them. And they worked in the scenario, it was talking about how the parents thought that their kids weren't getting anything because they were like being tutors basically. But we talked about the pyramid of learning and how at the bottom it was like 90% of retention is being able to teach it to someone else. That's why when people say, well, if you can't do it, you should teach it. Well, you can't teach it if you can't do it. And so therefore the students are actually getting a higher level of retention, the ones who are teaching it. And in the meantime, they're learning things like compassion, empathy, how to be a good learner, how to help others. They're learning a lot of skills that are more than just the content at the same time. And so we talked about having, teaching the parents about this and possibly having them come in for like a day where they get to see exactly what's going on in the classroom and see we obviously have to be careful about, the laws and making sure that they didn't know who was EC kids and who wasn't. But this idea of having peer tutoring, I think would be really something really awesome to show parents, because when they saw their kids being able to explain it so thoroughly, I think they would really know that their kids were learning more than they thought they were. So what might Ishmael do, the technical coordinator, do to integrate and create some harmony out of the differences in opinion among the teachers? Obviously, I think that education is the key there, leading discussions, having communication, and doing some progress monitoring to show how effective it's being for the students in the different classrooms. Okay, what actions might Sylvia take with the families of the children in question in order to learn and share the achievements and experience? They could have the students create a digital portfolio where the students are actually teaching various different lessons. You could upload those on like a Google Classroom and kids could go back and use them for review. Parents could also see them. They could do enrichment activities. They could do, obviously if you do standards-based grading, then those kids could continue on as they progressed, and then as a part of reviewing, they could do the peer tutoring model. Okay, so the justice piece. Is it unlawful for special needs students to be educated in a separate setting away from their non-disabled peers? No, it's not. It is unlawful. It's not okay for that to happen unless that is the least restrictive environment for them. The principal should use her power and authority to advocate for the students with special needs. That is the principal's, main job, is to advocate for the needs of the students and the curriculum that's being taught, and teachers having the best education so that they can help students the best. As stated in the case study, inclusion is part of the school's mission. And so the principal needs to support and demonstrate what the school's mission is. Like, if you're a principal and you can't deal with the mission, then why are you a principal of the school? Obviously protecting their students' right to be in an inclusive classroom. IDEA, again, LRE. I think that's the main thing of this whole entire piece is IDEA in the least restrictive environment. You have to have shared decision making, but at the same time, what comes first is the federal law, and the federal law says that we have to have a least restrictive environment. And making sure that accountability for students means success in her professional capacity. The principal needs clearly defined roles. Yeah, so they need to make sure that the EC specialists and possibly EC assistants are, charged with leading those classrooms, helping in the classrooms, and being a co-teacher, not just a, sit in a small group and grade papers or run copies for me. Like, they should be a co-teacher teaching every student in the classroom, not just the EC students.
That's it.
Oh, thank goodness. That was a lot of talking. There were a lot of questions this week.
There were.
Sorry, guys. I tried to make it short and sweet.
Okay.
Good job.
Good job. All right.
Okay, let me have it. Let us have it.
Let you have it.
Kidding.
Okay. All right. Well, you did a good job. You did a good job.
But I hear a but coming in there.
I don't know. I don't know.
You're making me dizzy. Whew.
Mm. There we go. I don't know how I missed it a dozen times.
You were scrolling too fast, making us all dizzy.
That's what I was, yeah, making myself dizzy. All right. All right. All right. What's this case really about? I mean, I wanted you to learn all about IDEA and those kinds of things. But what's this case really about?
The principal?
It is. You hit upon it in your at the close. This is really about. This one is disguised and rolled around in EC and those things. But we're going to do inclusion model, and we know what FERPA is, and we can't talk about other people's children. And we're going to have parents that complain. This is a failure of leadership. This is the ethic of profession. That's what this case study is about, and that's why it's last. This is an example of what happens when you take a job as a leader and you choose not to lead. These are the kinds of things that happen to you. A leader would be out in front of this and make sure that teachers were trained. I think you made a good point. My suspicion is a lot of the parents are complaining because they're being whispered to by teachers who don't want to do this. And teachers are exacerbating this and keeping it stirred up with the peer tutoring model that they're using, where the parents are probably right in that that's being abused in the classrooms. Peer tutoring, you know, a little here or there, or doing some group work here or there, cooperative learning. But from what was described in this case study, I mean, that's what these kids do every day, all day, is teach the others. And I'm sure the teachers are doing that intentionally because they don't want to be bothered with them. And they're trying to, they don't care what the law is. They don't care about the law. You know, they're trying to get what they want. The principal is not leading, not getting in the classrooms, not directly, not being an instructional leader, not having these people trained in the right practices, not doing formative assessment fidelity checks to make sure that classes are being taught like they're supposed to be. This is what happens when you have the absence of an instructional leader. This is what you get into. I mean, there's no debate. We're going to do the inclusion model. Now, you can get on board or you can work somewhere else. But, you know, that's what the leader has to do. I mean, in this case, they're doing a terrible job. An absolute terrible job of instructional leadership. That's the real issue here. Is instructional leadership is not present. Not improper training, improper supervision, not doing PLCs, not working best practices. None of those things are happening. The principal send them to, like, you know, my era when I first started, you hire good teachers and send them to the room and you see them at the lunchroom, and then see them at bus duty at the end of the day. And that was, being an instructional leader was make sure they got their textbooks on time. That's the model of schooling that I'm seeing here. This is an absence of professional ethic of going in and working and doing the right thing. there's no debate. We can't do de facto or de jure segregation. We can't do homogeneous grouping again with the bluebirds, robins, and buzzards. I mean, when I first started, when we first went to the accountability model in I guess 89, 90, 90, 91, when the basic ed plan came in 84, we had the standard course of study in place by 89. I was principal of elementary school. First thing we did was we stopped doing grouping, started doing heterogeneous grouping because it was the right thing to do. First parent called me and said, "Why is my kid in the idiot class? She was just crying." And I said, "Your kid's not in the low class." "Oh, Billy's in there, and everybody knows he's an idiot." I mean, that absolutely happened to me, but it was the right thing to do. So you can't get into that debate. You got to do some community work. But IDA has been around long enough that folks understand that it's the federal law. The Secretary of Education might not, but we're not going to debate whether we're going to do this or not. We're going to go and do this. But I suspect that there was a lot of the teachers were rebellious, but not openly, that they were putting a lot of the parents up to this. And probably some of the teaching methodology that they were using was poor, intentionally, to incite the parents to complain because they didn't want to have to do this. We don't want those kids in our room. We've seen a lot of blowback on the inclusion model, even though we are sending a teacher with them. We have a lot of teachers who don't want those kids in their room. And it's all about instructional leadership. It's all about making sure that you're in those rooms and you're doing what you need to do. There's a lot, and that doesn't mean that you're not going to have teachers who buck and who incite and who do things indirectly to you. You're just going to have to smile and get through it. I'm reminded of myself in my high school chemistry lab. Henry McGinnis was at the lab station next to me, and Henry was the last of he was one of them babies that came along like used to, and his parents had about I don't know, they had about a dozen kids. You don't see families like that. They had enough, they had their own softball team, but he was the youngest by several years, and Henry was not the sharpest pencil in the box. And so I'll never forget one day Henry turned his Bunsen burner on, turned the gas on, and then started looking for his striker. And after he'd been looking a couple of minutes, 2 or 3, I said, "Here, use mine." He burned a big hole in the ceiling of the chem lab, of course, and lost his bangs and eyebrows. And of course, I had stepped back as I said, "Here, take mine." I was smart enough to step back because I knew what was going to happen. I didn't think it was going to be that big of an explosion, but you get people who do things like that. "Oh, I had the best intentions. Henry needed to borrow my striker." That's what teachers will do for you sometimes. I know you're all teachers, and I don't mean to be ugly, but you got to understand when you change your lens and when you step on the other side of the desk, it's not an adversarial relationship. But teachers are always going to do what needs to be done. Too many folks work at their own self-interest. They don't want those kids in their room, and they may do things like this to you. The way that you combat that is not, coming in all rough and gruff and punch them in the nose. It's become a better instructional leader. That's the key. Is instructional leadership would have solved many of these problems. Now, the first half of this semester, you spent looking and working and coming up with models of instructional leadership, building BLCs, how to go about doing that. The problem in this case is none of that was done. They just said, "We're going to put these kids in the room, go." And the principal didn't bother to do any staff development, didn't do any PLC work, didn't monitor what was going on in the classrooms, and this is what blew up on her. Just like Henry's Bunsen burner, it blew up. And it was totally avoidable. That's the lesson to be learned from this case study. Is things like this are totally, yes, the material was exceptional children. That was kind of a fake out job on my part. Sorry. But don't be distracted by the content of inclusion and IDEA. That this is a simple case of not being an instructional leader. That's what this one is all about. You don't have any choice. I mean, it's not like you can say, well, we won't do that if you don't like it, teachers, because it's the law, as you pointed out. It's not debatable. It's not up for discussion. This is something that we're going to do because it's the right thing, number one. It's ethically, it's the right thing. And two, it's the legal thing that we have to do. So let's set about our task of going and doing that. But you have to be the leader that leads people through this. You can't just send them to the room and say, go get it done and expect that it's going to happen. This is a perfect example of just sending teachers to the room and just assuming that they'll do the right thing.
It's obvious because when I read that she was asking Ishmael to provide technical support and all of that, that's the first thing that kind of came to my mind. Why is she asking Ishmael? She needs to take the reign.
Yes.
And basically, lead her staff towards, success. Lead them towards what the mission statement says. And try not to, because, the way she's talking to them, you don't want her to kind of succumb to parents because she's going to set a bad precedence if she, let them bully her, so to speak.
Oh, yeah.
She needs to take charge of her school, really.
She does need to take charge of her school. We don't talk about other people's children. FERPA laws, in this country, they'll put you in jail. Not only you lose your job, federal guidelines, you can't talk about other people's children, divulge them. But she is getting bullied by parents, but that's because she's not being a leader. She's not stepping up and fulfilling her role as the leader. That's what they pay. Remember, when you take that administrative role, you don't teach children anymore. And what do we do in school? What is our hedgehog? What is our what is our sausage? What is our primary function is to teach kids. You don't do that anymore when you become an administrator. They pay you to lead, not to teach. And if you don't lead, what are you there for? If you can't do the hard things and lead your staff, if you can't lead them through PLCs and growth plans and staff development, our core competency in the school business is teaching. The administrator has to be there to allow that to occur and to ensure that it does occur. That's what do they do at Jones Sausage? They make sausage. What do we do in school? We teach kids. If you're part of the faculty that doesn't do that, if you're in the leadership role, it's your job to make sure teachers have the conditions and the skills and the ability to do that, and that you protect them and you work with them and you grow them into the teachers that they need to be. You don't just take whatever you got and luck of the draw kind of thing. This principle failed in all areas, on all the standards of leadership. That's what this case is about. It's an absence of leadership. It's the actual course material. Don't get distracted by EC and all those kinds of things. Yes, it's germane to this case, but the bigger issue is here's a situation where we made a curricular change in a school and the principal didn't lead that change. That this principal got run over by that change or that train coming through. This is what happens. You either get out in front and lead or you get run over. She got run over. And that's the crux of this case. Because it wasn't like she could choose to do this or not. The law in this country is clear. IDA is the law. It's not like, well, she's trying to be on the right side of history here. No, she's on the wrong side, and she did it badly to boot. There's no justification for not getting on board and leading through this. It's the legal thing to do. It's the ethical. It's the moral thing to do. She didn't fulfill any of the ethics in this case. Mostly a profession of making sure that she did the right thing. She did not work hard and assume the role of the leader. Especially, she did not assume the role of the servant leader, of being the one out front and leading. And then she tried to send somebody else. Boy, I mean, that, again, the only thing she could have done worse was burn the building down. Yeah. Yeah. So this one, again, all these legal cases all come back to your role as the leader, just like the one last week. They all come back to, if you don't lead, you're going to get run over. All right, who's next?
I go next. Let's see.
Just hit share.
Okay.
There you go.
You see it? Yay. Okay. So we have the case study 4 and inclusive education, success for all or success for some. I cannot change my presentation. How do I move it? There you go. Make it bigger. First question, how might the principal approach and future meetings with her teachers? Is it necessary to choose an approach over the others? So Eugenia needs to explain the law to her teachers because, as you said before, the IDEA requires that exceptional children be educated in the least restrictive environment appropriate. So needs to be included based on the law, and it also depends on, not exactly the same way, it depends on the students' needs by grade levels and by the needs of the classrooms. The second question was, what is the path that she should take? So inclusion, of course, is the most appropriate path for the students, but the teachers need to be well prepared with administration and supported by C teachers. So they
there you go. That's it.
And the third question is one point of view more correct than the other? So we had a discussion about what point of view was the question about. So there were different points of view, the teachers versus the teachers, second grade teachers and fourth grade teachers. So the second grade teachers were talking about having a more inclusive education for students, and also the point of view of the parents versus the teacher who was serving the students in a more inclusive model. However, she needs to balance instruction because although she was paying a lot of attention to the EC kids, it seems that the other kids were not doing a lot of, or maybe she was not interacting too much with the others.
Yeah, she was having them teach, she was having the regulars teach the EC, probably intentionally to get parents to complain. That's correct.
Maybe, but anyway, she was trying to serve the kids more than apparently many of the other teachers.
Yeah, but unfortunately, she was doing it in the incorrect way. Good point.
Okay, so we'll go to the other parts, to the other questions. Let's see.
All right, so the fourth.
Yes, sorry.
The fourth question was about collaboration with the families, and we thought it would be important for parents to volunteer in the classroom so they can encourage an appreciation for diversity. It will also allow them an opportunity to actually see the classroom instruction in action. We know that sometimes as teachers, we may do things one way, but then the students may take it home a different way. So this will actually give them the opportunity to see what's going on in the classroom. The fifth question, what could Ismael do to get some harmony? He could schedule peer observations and debrief sessions to allow them to observe other teachers and how they're doing the inclusion model in their classrooms. He could also seek out professional learning opportunities and either have consultants come in or arrange for teachers to go to maybe some conferences to learn more about inclusion and mainstream, and then also maybe a book study with the staff on teaching exceptional children. And activities that Sylvia can take on with the families, share her instructional practices at the next parent meeting, along with the research that supports student collaboration and peer-to-peer teaching. She could also have an open door policy to allow the parents to come in to observe with stipulations. I know in schools that I worked in, we've had the open door policy, but the parents knew that when they come in the room, you have to sit at the back of the room. You can't disturb the teacher, any students, and then you can't disturb your child either. And that way it shows a sense of transparency, and they have a better understanding of what's going on in the classroom, as well as their child's personal achievement on their child teaching other students.
Excuse me. So our next slide was a breakdown of the PowerPoint that we got, which was the inclusion versus mainstream. There was a lot of getting down to the clear differences between having a child self-contained, separated from regular ed students, and the services that regular ed students are offered in the regular setting, versus having a special needs student included into a regular ed classroom where the classroom can be paired with an inclusion teacher and the resources are brought in with the child. And directly or indirectly, those resources could be used by all. In the presentation, it also talked about making sure that there's a process in place to identify whether this child qualifies for services and what type of services he or she should receive. And the government is really partial on making sure that there's a system in place where assessments were made. There would be a benefit for the student to be in a regular ed setting. It wouldn't be a detriment to the regular ed students in the environment, and it would also be an asset to the classroom teacher. There's various things that we're looking at, including making sure that money is not a reason why a decision's made one way or another. The PowerPoint also talked about research that's been done, and there's no definitive research. I'm trying to find exactly where I put my notes on that, but it appears like there's no definitive research that states one way or another which service can benefit more. It's almost like you can interpret the data the way you're leaning, which is kind of interesting. I appreciate the government trying to do its part to make sure that the child's needs are met first. But depending on what you're looking for, you're going to find whether putting a special needs student in a self-contained versus regular ed environment would be better. And then we went from looking at the PowerPoints to the paradigms.
So looking at the four ethical paradigms, you have justice and care. And with justice, we said that Eugenia needed to ensure a full and total inclusion for all students in her school. And according to IDEA, students who are in their less restrictive environment. And as we stated earlier, a lot of times what ended up happening was she had an idea of what should have been happening, but didn't check to see that it was happening. For care, she felt that it was best, inclusion was best. It was also a part of her mission. The teacher even quoted that that's what she believed in, but she had not actually been observing that to see what is been done daily. And she did immediately collaborate with her technical coordinator. But as we said before, maybe she was putting too much power in the technical coordinator's hands versus her doing it herself. For the next one, we have critique. And Eugene, she, like you said, there was a lot of information that was there to distract us. And it seemed as though she was doing a great job and she wanted what was best. But like you said, there was no follow through on the instructional part. But we also said that we could help parents learn what inclusion and mainstreaming is so that they would know, as well as help the teachers know that this isn't just some idea that has came about and it sounds good. It's actually something that we have to do. And as far as profession, the main thing that we really want to talk about was that she does have legal responsibilities to ensure that the individuals are safeguarded, but she also needs to reevaluate the role of the EC teacher, the teachers in general. And after hearing some of the conversations that we had earlier, she needs to evaluate her role as well.
Mm-hmm.
And that is it.
Okay. The point to be made here, excellent job. I like number 2, where you talk about she's got to do some training of her teachers and staff development. The point to be made here is whether it's inclusion or whether it's any other program that your district, that's a district initiative or a state initiative or a federal, your job as principal is to carry it out. Educate parents, staff development for teachers. That's your job. I told you the story, and I'll tell it again quickly. Principal's meeting in Charlotte-Mecklenburg. You came in, staff development center, they had a big stack with your name on it. You needed a boy to carry it. It was so big. And you sat there the whole morning during the general session and you sorted it into 3 piles. You know, the FYI stuff for your information. We'd throw those in the dumpster at lunchtime. They had a big dumpster out back. We didn't even take that back. Then you had the other 2 piles that you carried back to your school was one that said, we need for you to do this. You can decide with among your faculty how you want to do it and when you want to do it. But then we had this stack that was, this is a district initiative. Do it now. Do it this way. And when I would go back and do the faculty meeting with the faculty, the first half of the faculty meeting was the business meeting. The second half was housekeeping, and we would get done in 30 minutes because we would distribute it and work in smaller groups and departments, VLCs. But one of the things that I was sure to tell teachers up front, this is not debatable. This is not if you want to. This is we're going to do this and we're going to do it now. We're going to do it this way. My job as a representative of the school district is to make sure that I follow through with the initiatives of the district. That's why they hired me. I can't go back and debate, well, the research is unclear on inclusion. I don't think we'll do that, or we'll think about it, or we'll do it. Your job as an administrator, the reason they gave you the salary and the position and the keys is that they felt confident that when they told you we need to do X, Y, and Z, that you would do X, Y, and Z. But you wouldn't go rogue and do whatever you wanted to because you didn't think that it was, it wasn't something that you thought had a lot of value or you were unclear about it. Your job is to be the leader. And number one thing that the central office is looking for, and this is from the years that I supervised principals, is to make sure that when we had rules and regulations, policies, that we followed those, that if we had programs or initiatives, that we followed through with those things. We didn't, that you understood that these things weren't optional. And you have to understand that they hired you because they believed that you would follow through and do the things that you were supposed to do. That's a big part of choosing administrators. Will this person go rogue and leave the reservation and do what they want to do, or will they follow out the mission and the directives of the district? The reason I like this case is inclusion. When your district, when we've adopted that as our delivery method for exceptional children, it's not a debate anymore. This is what we're going to do. You need to inform parents. You need to educate parents. You need to work with teachers, educating them. You need to train them. You need to be in the rooms making sure that they're delivering as intended. That's called instructional leadership. The part working with parents, that's called micro-political leadership. That's standard number 7 of the administrative code in North Carolina. Is managerial. You have managerial, you'll have instructional, but you have micro-political as well. That's all part of being the leader. You can't expect people just to jump on board because you want them to. You have to go out and do the work. That's why I said this principal didn't do the work, didn't inform the community of what was going on, didn't work with parents, didn't do staff development with teachers. When problems started to rise, tried to put it off on somebody else. That's not what you're being paid for. You're being paid to be out front and lead people through these processes. Will you get hit with some of the slings and arrows and bullets? Yes, you will. That's your job. That's what they pay you for. I guess my biggest pet peeve in the business is people who want the salary and want the title but don't want to do the job. And understand that the job is making the hard decisions and following through. That we don't want to do what I don't like doing that. Well, then you don't need to be in the role. Then you don't need the job if you don't like doing that. These are the hard things. You don't work with children anymore. You now work with adults. You lead them, and these are the hard things that you have to do. And people aren't always going to be singing your praises. And if you don't follow district initiatives and the parents, come to the school board meeting and your support's not going to help you, they're not going to re-up you when your contract's up if you don't follow what the district has for you to do, especially when it's federal law. They'll get somebody else who will. And so this notion that, I'm just not sold on this or that, that's immaterial. People above your pay grade made these decisions. This is what we're going to do, and this is what we're going to do. You have to, that's the ethic of profession. You have to follow through and do what you're supposed to do. All right, our last presentation of the evening.
And that will be us, or me, I guess.
Who's me?
Shanna Good.
There you are. I've got my screen blocked. I couldn't see who was talking. I've got the participant list up. I'm sorry. Let's see. Reclaim host. And then I got to find Shanna in the list. There you are. I'm going to make you the host.
Okay.
And I will. There we go. You're now the host. I'll get rid of that
right.
so I can see your presentation.
So we have said quite a bit of the things that the other groups have said. So we have a summary of the case study. We had some initial thoughts. Sorry, my internet is super slow. We talked about the least restrictive environment too. We talked about how the EC kids should be non-identifiable and the different types of inclusion and co-teaching you should see in and around your building. And it was very, eye-opening to hear different experiences and how that's happening, how it's not happening. We talked about the importance of MTSS. It's MTSS in our county, and
right.
The book called it the pre-referral process, I think. And how important that actually is. And then I had a little bit more of a background there because we're starting our training for all of the new developments for SLD and OHI and AU coming down from the state in the next year and a half. So we talked about how it's going to be really hard to rule out that lack of appropriate instruction to qualify EC. So we talked about all those evidence-based interventions, the core instruction tiers, how MTSS folders or whatever your referral process is never just handed off to anyone, and that idea of differentiation and how all teachers should be doing that, not just the ones of EC kids. So we said that was very much a relevant issue, that it's education for all, not just some. There's always confusion with who's responsible. We talked about that, and we'll get into that more when we talk about the answers to the questions. We talked about the law, same thing that pretty much everyone else has said. We added some relevant cases that just kind of supported the fact that students with disabilities will have a right to be mainstreamed in the least restrictive environment as much as possible. Let's see. We talked about, again, a lot of the same things about how the principal should have known about the goings on in each classroom rather than be surprised with the parents telling her. That, it is her job to facilitate those relationships with the Reg Ed and EC teachers. The path that she should take, that whole lesson plan, checks and balances, like if she did, the lesson plans don't have to be 50 pages, but if she did glanced over them, she would have seen that she's teaching this same small group all day, every day kind of thing. The EC support for classroom teachers to understand IEPs and inclusion, because again, a lot of times it's scary for a Reg Ed teacher to have so many responsibilities, and then on top of that, this federal document that they have to follow. So making sure they know how to navigate those. We looked at the point of view. Again, we were kind of confused as to which way they were asking that question, but essentially there's not one point of view that's more correct than the other. Different strategies work with different kids. And we talked about how that goes back to that MTSS initial referral process, and about how the upcoming changes are hopefully going to help that issue, where it's not just you tried this one intervention, it didn't work, okay, now they're going to EC. It's going to make you actually go through that process multiple times. Bottom line, she needed to be aware, and they needed to be talking about all of this in their PLCs. So then we said those probably were not being implemented either. We talked about the collaboration from the children's families, and that aspect about encouraging an appreciation for diversity. So we wanted to know more, like, how are those teachers communicating with parents? Are they sending newsletters home every week? Are they updating their web pages with activities, those differentiation strategies, like, hey, this week we're working on choice boards. Your student gets to choose their own individual activities. Next week we'll be doing, peer teaching, that kind of thing. Being proactive, so that a kid doesn't come home and say, oh, this is all I did all week. Curriculum nights, we threw that in there because that's been something that's been really beneficial, I think, in the community, where we bring the parents in and we show them exactly what the curriculum is and exactly what Common Core is asking them to do, and how those peer relationships actually facilitate that learning.
We actually, to interrupt you, Shannon, we actually have an entire evidence that, go back one slide. Oh. We have an entire evidence that does what you have in number 4. It's called our Stakeholder Community Improvement Plan, and it seeks to find gaps in community. It's the SKIP. It's the one after the OMA that y'all didn't have to do, that the regular add-ons do. We figured you folks already knew this, but what we have the regular add-ons do is an entire evidence where they find gaps in communication with parents and seek to fill those using technology, social media, web pages, those things. And then that's their short-term goal. Their long-term goal is then to put in events once they have hooked the parent and are now communicating. Family math night, curriculum night, it has to be a curriculum night. They have to plan and pull one of those off. We knew that you folks already knew how to do that and had done that. But we actually have an entire evidence that speaks to number 4 here, that obviously this principal wasn't doing. That's a big part of what you need to do as the instructional leader of the building. So excellent. Yes, we have an entire evidence that speaks to number 4 that you have here.
Oh, yay. Go team. Okay. And then our last few questions. As an expert in the area of learning, what might Ishmael, the technical coordinator, do? So again, we dropped it back to truly understanding what the mission of that school was and how to execute it, and facilitating those PLCs so that all the teachers could collaborate on how to teach all students, not just individual groups. They should always be in constant collaboration and incorporate PD. We were very surprised that they weren't doing that already.
Yes.
And then the last one, what actions might Sylvia take with the families? So talk to parents individually about student growth for their own children. We did a whole project in the EDCI program about family and community engagement and getting students to take ownership, student-led conferences, that kind of thing, getting teachers to talk individually with those kids individually, not just as a group at a table, kind of thing. So making sure the kids knew their growth as well as the parents. And then we had, in the county I came from, we don't have one in the county I'm in now, but we had like a bridge / cheat sheet of activities and types of instruction. Like we had to fill out something for our AIG kids that says these are all the types of activities we're going to do this year. We had to do the same thing for EC kids, just so that we already had it, and it was not necessarily a fail safe, but like something to fall back on if you found yourself using too much of one and not enough of others. And the same thing for the parents. Like you could say, no, that's not all we're doing. Here's our list of other things that we can do. So
some districts call those their list of non-negotiables. This is what you'll get. That's correct.
And that's pretty much it. I think we've talked about everything else.
Excellent, excellent. This one's a home run here. Y'all, I think you all did a great job tonight. This presentation is kind of a summary of all my comments tonight. This points out to the problem here. This was a lack of instructional leadership, of working your craft, being good at your profession. When I looked at what I felt you folks needed in this abbreviated add-on, I realized that y'all had done the school and community and had done those kinds of things. And so even though we didn't cover it with you in this course, I was aware that you folks knew that should be done, or that was part of it. But get back to the case for the evening. The final presentation here summarizes basically an absence of profession from this administrator. Didn't do anything right from top to bottom. You can't, hope is not a plan. You can't just hope things are going to go well. You have to plan for them. You have to be strategic in your thinking and put your plans in place. No communication, no training, no supervision, no professional development, no PLCs, no nothing. This is middle of last century administration. It was even better when I came along in the 80s. It was even better than this. But this was how the experience, this was the administration of my childhood, middle of last century. This is what administrators did in those days. They hired teachers and sent them to the room, and that they felt like their job was done once they'd hired them. You can't do that anymore. My final story for the evening, absolutely a true story. Absolutely a true story. Now, some of the stories I tell, maybe a little poetic justice or license. This is absolutely a true story. So I'm getting ready to retire. We're going through advanced ed. And so our group, the division that I had in CMS, we're going through. And so we've got the legal department there. We've got EC there. We've got all these people. We've got exceptional children. We've got AIG, director for AIG. We're all, and it's Friday, and the team's been there all week. And so I knew the leader of the team. He had been high school principal. We'd been high school principals together years before. And so he came in, he said, I've heard scripted answers all week. I'm tired of hearing these scripted answers to our questions. We're going off script today. So I have one question for you today. I want you to tell me and the team here the one most significant thing that you've done in your career for the children of this district. And so we started around the table, and I was on the far side of the table at the end, so I was going to be the last one to go. course, we started with the associate general counsel, and she talked for about 15 minutes. She had about 3 minutes worth, but she made it last 15 minutes, as most attorneys do. And how they'd redone the code of conduct and this and that and the other, and how it had benefited kids. And we went through, inclusion model with the EC and came all around. And they got to the lady next to me. She was sitting on this side of me over here. And she said, I started out as a teacher in this district, and there was this high school principal that took a chance on me and promoted me, and he was such a wonderful person. And he, had me teaching AP classes in my second semester, and he believed in me and pushed me to go back to school and all these wonderful things. And I've met my future, met my husband there at the school, and we have children, and we've done all these wonderful things. And it was truly the greatest story ever told about all the wonderful things that she had done in the district, and what had happened for kids as a result of all these different initiatives that she'd had. And everybody else, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Everybody else was crying because of the story she was telling. I was crying because I had to follow her. I said, what am I going to say? This is not going to go well. So it had taken so long that morning. It was about 1 o'clock, and we've been there all morning since 9. And I thought, what's going to happen? We'll break for lunch, and I'll go when we come back, and I'll just skip out because I got other things. I'm sure some crisis has happened in the district, and I'll skip on off and won't have to think. So the leader of the group looked down at me, and he said, oh, no. He said, I know what you're thinking, Dale. I said, you're thinking that we're going to go to lunch now and you're going to get off the hook. I said, that's not what's going to happen. And he looked at me, he pointed directly at me. He said, Dale, what is the one thing that you have done for that made a difference in the lives of the children of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg School District? And I looked him right in the eye and pointed to the lady next to me and said, I hired her. Absolutely a true story. I was that principal that had hired her and took camp. But the point of the story is you can't just, your job as administrator, is to make good hires, but that's not the end of it. That's the very beginning. In the middle of the last century, that was your total job as the administrator. Hire good teachers. They all went to the room and closed the door, and then you saw them at the end of the year. Or you might have saw them at the faculty Christmas party, but that's the only time you saw them. That's not the role anymore. That's not the job. You've got to work right along with them every day. You've got to work harder than they do. You've got to be the instructional leader. And if you don't, it won't happen in your building, and you will not be successful. You can't just hire the great teacher. You don't get many great ones anyway. She was the only one I ever hired that was great out of the box, and I hired a lot. Most of them required a whole lot of work to get them just to passable, and then more than that for them to develop into great teachers. But that's your job, is to develop them into great teachers. You can't just hire them and send them to the room. And so that was the purpose of this case study, is to kind of put it all together for you. And in the end, it's all about leadership. Yeah, we got to follow the law, and yes, we got to be ethical, but it's all about leadership. And if you don't do it, it won't get done. All right, that's the benediction for the evening. Anybody else have anything for the good of the group? All right, I will see you folks in Charlotte. What's that, the first weekend in April?
Yes.
I'll bring any special requests on food?
Pizza.
Pizza for lunch? Okay. We'll have biscuits for breakfast, and I'll have some pizza brought in for lunch. That sounds good.
Okay.
We'll do that on Saturday. Now Sunday we'll probably go home about lunchtime on Sunday. Will that be okay?
Oh, that sounds good. That sounds great.
Yeah,
So
that's
fantastic.
We'll have pizza on Saturday, but we'll go home about lunchtime on Sunday. So I'll put that on my calendar to make sure I do that. Y'all all have a good week. Thank you for playing along.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.